erection is the sign of a micro-penis.
This, my friends, is peak cinema. It is no secret that over the years, Netflix as a streaming platform had quite many hits, but they also had just as many, if not more, duds that populate their extensive catalog. The show from which that glorious gem of a quote originates, a Netflix fantasy series titled The Order, first came out all the way back in 2019. You may wonder why exactly I would dredge up a random, obscure show from days long past. Well, I have come to believe that The Order is quite unique, and it exists in an interesting context. I did not learn of it through the usual channels, not through trailers or other promotional material. No, my initial exposure came from all the comparisons to The Magicians. Seeing that I myself am quite a fan of The Magicians, I did manage to force myself to watch the show, and by the title of the video, you can already divine what type of experience I had. Let me tell you, it was not a pleasant one. Reasons for that exist many. The most basic one may seem that I already have a certain disposition coming into this show, as it is The Magicians that is a starting off point for me. Believe me, this is not lost on me, yet it is exactly this relationship between The Order and The Magicians that I find the most fascinating, because there is quite a lot that this relationship, this connection can tell us about The Order itself. So, is it actually just yet another fantasy ripoff? The answer to that is a tad more complicated than you may think. To start off any more serious analysis, it is better to start off by understanding the basics. So what is the story of The Order actually about? Well, it centers its narrative on Belgrave University. The university itself, in contrast to the likes of Breakbills, is ordinary. Its focus is not on magic itself. However, there exist organizations within the school that do dabble in some magical affairs. We are initially introduced to two of these throughout the show's narrative. The first one is the Hermetic Order of the Blue Rose. It is an organization that is comprised of mages, people who practice magic. On the other side of the coin, we have the second magical organization, the Knights of St. Christopher. The people within this group are not mages, but rather werewolves. These two organizations are not particularly friendly to each other, at least at first. Season 2 sees inclusion of two other organizations, Praxis and the Esoteric Sons of Prometheus. The overarching theme of the magic in the show is that it is not particularly approached as academic, a contrast to the Magicians and their approach, but it is rather mystical. I will admit that I am not a fan of this type of magic. In this sense, I do prefer the grounded approach of the Magicians, but this doesn't mean a good story cannot exist within these foundations. If anything, a secret society within a university, while not the most original idea, can be compelling enough of a hook. Yet, what about the characters that inhabit this world? The characters, as you may expect within the setting, are primarily 20-something-year-old students at Belgrave University. We are introduced into this world primarily through the character of Jack Morton. He is our audience surrogate. It is through him that we are inducted into this magical world. He is very notably the main character. He gets into the university to exact revenge on his father named Edward Coventry. There is some extended drama there. Along the way we meet other characters. We have Alyssa, who is part of the Order and is a promising young student. She is smart, and there is that, I guess. We also have Randall, who is a glorified joke machine, Lilith, who is just mad at everything that breathes, and Hamish, who likes to dress well. All of these characters in one way or another become involved with our main character Jack. There are also other characters such as Gabrielle, whose main personality trait is being mean to everyone. The one character that carried the most personality and most charm was Vera. She's kind of like the Dean Fogg from The Magicians. I actually liked her character, and I think the actors did a great job. Probably the best out of the entire cast. Now, up until this point, my descriptions have been quite uninformative, quite shallow you could say, because a lot of these things that I said are both used by the show, and both can be boiled down to simple tropes. Tropes themselves are not a dirty word, by any means. Any such notion that a trope by itself is bad is usually futile. Tropes are inevitable, and it is fine to use them, as long as they are a foundation, a framework. Any creative can use tropes however they like and imbue life into them. So, how does The Order do that? Well, the reality is that it simply doesn't. This show, to its detriment, thinks that it is way cooler than it actually is. It's just the way it carries itself with so much arrogance and pretend grandiosity that makes everything laughable. It thinks that it is digging deep, yet it manages to be so remarkably shallow. Take for instance the entire magic system that they have set up. As it is established, magic needs sacrifice. With this type of magic system, there are obviously some obstacles that rise up in the writing process. If you have that type of a system, you have to establish a very clear sense of how much sacrifice is actually needed, how much much skill factors into the equation, and stuff like that. In other words, you have to have at least some thought put into it. The Order, however, does little to no thinking. There is no thought running behind those eyes at all. This show takes the most wee-woo approach possible. You have characters speak of sacrifice needed to perform magic, yet on the other hand, you have characters perform magic left and right, from simple door openings to healing spells, without those spells exacting any prize. In fantasy, magic systems are either hard or soft. A hard magic system has well-defined rules, while a soft magic system has rules that are left vague. Overall, the magic system in the Order is a soft one. The rules are all over the place, but I think the sacrifice part should have been better defined, because they make a big show out of the sacrifice that is required for the magic to be performed. In the finale of Season 2, the character of Alyssa wants to unleash a spell that eliminates all the need for sacrifice, but Vera states that
nothing frees practitioners from sacrifice. Pay now, or you pay later. Later costs more.
Yet the magic system of the Order doesn't live up to that at all. It could also be used as a great thematic device, but it simply isn't, because the show doesn't put enough substance to actually justify all the posturing about sacrifice within its writing. The spells themselves range from uninspired to straight out random. They have no rhyme or reason whatsoever. They do not in any way indicate that there is a cohesive magic system behind them. If you ever get around to watching the show, not that I would recommend doing that, I encourage you to pay attention to this. Any spell that you see on the screen is either completely random and presented in the most awkward way possible, or the most uninspired thing you have ever seen.
But spoiler alert, this is no ordinary hunk of rock.
It is either the most out of the left field thing, or just some wee-woo blood occult magic. There is no in between. Even the names of the spells are the most basic Latin mumbo-jumbo imaginable. There is also another thread that they have running across at least few episodes at the beginning. Jack is displayed as attending ethics classes, which includes some of the most pretentious discussions in the context of the show. Within them, they talk about ethics, of course. The show presents the most trite examples, and those examples are presented in such a way that the show itself thinks that it is delivering gold.
So would you?
Go back in time and kill Hitler, of course.
You kill a baby? You monster.
Okay, I won't.
You won't kill Hitler. It's fucking Hitler.
Is this gonna be on the test?
They linger on these scenes for so unnecessarily long while the professor keeps yapping about these random concepts and morality. You would think that they would somehow contribute to the greater argument, to a complexity within this magic system, to perhaps display that magic may be used in morally gray ways. But no, the show quite literally always devolves into good guys versus bad guys. Good magic versus bad magic. There is absolutely no complexity whatsoever to the magic system. Sure, some characters such as Alyssa remark how it will be for the betterment for all to kill random people, but Jack and the Knights are not convinced by that. There is no deeper argument, no complexity, it's just good side versus bad side. At least, not enough complexity to justify a random side character waxing about it for extended periods of time. Then there are also the secret organizations themselves. Both the Order and the Knights are as fleshed out as any other area of the show, aka none at all. They are as cliché as you would expect. The Order, or the magic practitioners, practice random magic that doesn't really amount to anything of note, and are sometimes mustache twirling for no real reason. They walk around pretending to be imposing, talking about how powerful they are and how they could change the world. The proof of that doesn't really exist though. The werewolves are just fighting the mages for their supposed cause. They walk around, and you've guessed it, pretending to be imposing but also badass with a bravado that is not earned at all. There is also another edge to the story. That is the elitism angle that they are aiming for. This is the one difference from the magicians that I can compliment the Order on. Breakbills invited people into their ranks more so on their merit and the ability rather than their status. The Belgrave University, however, is described as prestigious. It is an institution attended by the 1%ers. The main character, Jack, is a scholarship student and is from a poorer background than everyone else. The magic of this world is also contained to the secret societies, which are only accessible through the prestigious university. You can see the argument being made here for there existing a certain classism surrounding magic, but they do not really do much with it. Jack, with him being an outlier in the university, does receive some targeted attacks from the rich students. He does get singled out sometimes. There's also a singular higher member in the Order who actively works against Jack getting into the university for her own gain, but that is the extent of it. Classism and elitism are contained to only those instances. If you were to go by the show's logic, most of the students attending the university are rich, but you do not feel any larger repercussions of that. Everyone just acts like regular 20-something-year-olds. There are no real points made about Jack experiencing the world differently. You do not feel as though the other characters characters are shaped by their privilege. It just feels as though the writing process didn't factor in what type of dynamic such a class disparity would entail. Jack, for instance, does get rejected from the Order at first because of that one member who tried to get her son into the Order, but as soon as he proves it was all a ruse, no one really bats an eye and just allows him in either way. Even Coventry, the antagonist of the season, just welcomes him with open arms. The perpetrator of the entire scheme even gets brutally punished for it by none other than the antagonist of the season, and her crime is not covered up by her cronies. Honestly, the show doesn't really give much indication that this is a systemic issue at all, since all of it is contained to isolated instances that later go on to be in some way punished. The only thing that they have going for them is that this order is only seemingly accessible through the prestigious university, but the problem doesn't really extend beyond that. Season 2, to an idiotic extent, shoots both the magic system and the theme of elitism in the foot. Season 2 details a limitation to the magic system. They introduce Tartarus eruptions, energy surges that occur when the magic is performed incorrectly. Admittedly, the idea of someone getting actively penalized for not performing a spell correctly is an interesting choice. It could add stakes to every spell and also pressure. The second season also sees the introduction of the overall argument that magic should be accessible to everyone and not just secret orders. The problem with that is, if you make it accessible to everyone, then the collective amount of magic performed incorrectly increases exponentially. I mean, the entire process of learning magic involves a lot of trial and error. More trial and error than in any other area if it comes to magic, I would imagine. So if you have this type of a limitation, you inherently cannot democratize that magic, which in turn kind of justifies the existence of the Order and their elitism, because they cannot allow more members, because if they do, there is a bigger risk of a Tartarus eruption that could actually end the world, so you cannot really teach it widely. The show also displays this happening. The antagonist of the second season, Salvador, uses exactly this limitation of the magic system to achieve her goal of trying to end the world. But you know, it also makes sense why the Order is the way it is, because if only a select group of people can get access to magic, it places them at an advantage over everyone else, which then makes them capable of getting themselves on top of the hierarchy. So at least some amount of the Order's selectiveness makes sense in this context, because it makes sense as to why they would be so hard on limiting the use of magic. The Order clearly doesn't think about this. A potential critique of even using magic in the first place, knowing it poses a threat to everyone, was right there, and the Order doesn't even glimpse at it. What it feels like is that the Order says a lot of things, but I am not exactly sure it understands even the half of what it is saying. It wants to be serious, but it feels more like a cheap kids TV show with the way things are executed. And it is up until this point that I was able to speak of the show without bringing in the magicians in a more major way, because the magicians in a perverse way holds many of the answers that can help understand this particular show. It is often said that comparison is a thief of joy. In most cases, this holds true, but how exactly does it pan out for the Order? Well, if you watch the Order and keep the magicians in mind, there are quite a few similarities that immediately pop out. The two settings, universities, while they contain their differences in the way they are approached, one being a university that is exclusively focused on magic, and the other merely having an organization that does magic, the initial foundation for comparison is still there. Whichever way you look at it, the framework is still similar. It obviously doesn't help that both shows, but also many others, choose quite similar shooting locations for their universities. The names of these institutions are not particularly distinct either. Brakebills and Belgrave may as well become the same if you repeat them enough times. A major distinction can be made in the way the magic is presented, yet the more you go, the more you may spot these similarities in other areas. Take for instance the characters. Our character Jack bears quite a lot of resemblance to Quentin, at least on a physical level. Jack, however, is not obsessed with a fantasy book series. His obsession is rather in the university itself, as he is still embroiled in a scheme with his grandfather to avenge his mother and defeat Coventry. Both of these characters are our entry points into the magical world. Yet we also have Alyssa. Even upon first glance, even hearing her name, she seems eerily similar to Alice. Both these characters are presented as magical prodigies who know a lot about magic and the magical world. Both are studious, and both are drawn to the idea of bigger magic, of advancing in their studies and knowledge. Both have a rough relationship with their families. Their character arcs are also strikingly similar. Both have a tumultuous relationship with magic itself, and both end up, at least at one point, dead. It is also not lost on me that both Alyssa and Jack, similar to Alice and Quentin, develop a romance. There are certain other characters that seem familiar yet not quite. Sometimes you cannot help but see Gabrielle as a cheap copy of Margot, or Hamish as a weird knockoff of Elliot, or Lilith as an amateur rendition of Katie. There are other aspects that are also eerily similar. The identity change that happens at the end of season 1 of The Order and is carried over into the second season season is not too dissimilar to the identity change that happens at the end of the 3rd season of The Magicians and is carried over into the 4th. The pretenses of this identity change are also the same. They are brought about to protect these individuals from being killed because they know too much. The way the shows write themselves out of these situations are also similar. Characters with changed identities find their way to each other and all collectively unravel the mystery, and thus return to their previous identities. I am sure you could find some more strands that may have resemblance among the DNA that comprises the Order, but we have to contextualize the show. I want us to remember what I said in my review of The Magicians, in what way I began to unravel that show. Imagine if you combined Harry Potter and the Chronicles of Narnia and geared it towards adults. It is a bit ironic within the context of this video that I began that analysis in that particular way and with those particular comparisons, is it not? The truth of the matter is that certain concepts that we already discussed are used far and wide in the genre of fantasy. I mean, The Magicians themselves very clearly began as a child of many other fantasy works. Another truth is that if you look deep and close enough, you can find many kinds of kinships between many works of fantasy. Most of what we have just described and dabbled in, once again, have other names. Tropes. They are patterns that can be found within other works too. A magical education institution is not in any way unique to either the Order or the Magicians. A smart young prodigy character who seeks for higher power and thus slowly develops a strained relationship with magic is not unseen either, with neither of these shows being the pioneers for it. The Magicians doesn't hold a copyright over identity change either. Use of magic also is abundant in fantasy. To penalize this show for merely sharing these elements with other shows would be a rather unfair endeavor. And while yes, you have to admit that a lot of these similarities, in conjunction to one another, can appear eyebrow-raising, none of them really make for a compelling enough of a case to condemn the show as a simple ripoff just yet. Copying and inspiration can oftentimes become concepts that are hazy at best in fantasy writing. So, case closed? If it only was that simple, this video wouldn't even exist. It is not only in these areas that comparisons can be drawn. In actuality, there is an entire undercurrent that exists within the show that we have not yet touched upon. Something that is a dead giveaway that this show is cognizant that The Magicians exist. There is still something else that I said when introducing The Magicians in my review of it. Imagine if you combined Harry Potter and the Chronicles of Narnia and geared it towards adults. That is exactly a description that you would commonly hear if people were to describe The Magicians. For the sake of convenience, this does sound like an apt description, but it is a rather shallow summary of this particular show. And there is yet another truth that is required to understand. Just saying that the Order is like The Magicians is as shallow as saying that The Magicians is like Harry Potter. It is uninformative, and more importantly, I would say it is simply incorrect. As I have mentioned, the Order and The Magicians share a perverse bond between one another, and while we spend some time discounting certain possibilities of the Order being a mere copy, there are still some possibilities that are left to consider. Actually, there is far more evidence to suggest that the Order is just two 11-year-olds in a trench coat posing as The Magicians. I firmly believe that the Order benefits way more than it is hurt from being seen as a ripoff of The Magicians, because within that context, it makes far more sense. If you think of it with The Magicians in mind, you can at least see why it turned out the way it did. At least this daft piece of media gained some semblance of logic. And why do I make these claims, you may ask? The answer lies with none other than the main character. Emphasis theirs, not mine, on the word main, Jack Morton. Honestly, the Order could have gotten away with it if they had at least half a brain cell in the writing room, because it takes them only a few minutes into the first episode to step on their first landmine. The first scene of the show involves Jack going to the cemetery to open his acceptance letter into the Belgrave University, which is intercut with a conversation between Vera and the superior of the Order. Vera and the other member are discussing Jack. They have a back and forth, where the character of Jack is described as this.
Based on his academic achievements alone, I'd argue he's one of our best candidates.
An orphan.
A track and field champion.
The boy's a delinquent.
He's student council president.
What you're attempting to establish here is that Jack is supposed to be an underdog. Not exactly unheard of, something that makes sense to do. They are attempting to show a cause to root for Jack. They touch upon his background, that is not being rich, to establish some of the elitism within the Order, which, to reiterate, doesn't go much anywhere really besides manifesting in a few cliches here and there. They also establish establish that he is a delinquent, which is a fair assessment. He really is a jackass, pun completely intended. The one piece that sticks out to me is
A loner.
they also show some physics books on his desk, establishing that he is supposedly this loner geek. They also tell us how smart he is. You see, this characterization kind of reminds me of Quentin, a loner who is a geek and is implied not to be popular. That is basically Quentin in a nutshell. The thing about Quentin is that he is not a conventional protagonist. The first season of The Magicians is used to subvert the chosen one trope for this. He is chosen, yes, but he isn't the one who ultimately defeats the baddie to save the day. He's not the most important one around whom everything revolves. Jack, on the other hand, he's an utterly charmless moron who gets everything simply handed to him and gets everything through plot favoritism. What it feels like is that the show wanted to have a Quentin, but it failed at that spectacularly. If The Magicians was an antithesis to common tropes found in fantasy, The Order is the antithesis to the antithesis. In other words, it is the thesis. The Order, completely oblivious to the grander irony, defaults to the exactly same trope that The Magicians makes fun of. This show is so hell-bent on servicing the white male protagonist. They call Jack the loner, right? Randall alludes to him being this loser nerd.
You never stood a chance. She would have bailed the second she saw your Star Wars bedsheets.
Which, by the way, how does he even know that? By that point, Randall has just met Jack. He's a supposed loner, except as soon as Jack enters the general area of the university, all of this gets thrown out the window. Somehow, everyone and their mothers are obsessed with him. This mediocre dude who acts like a prick. He's a Gary Stu, a complete antithesis to Quentin. As soon as he takes his first steps, he literally gets kidnapped by one of the student organizations, and they tell him that
we've been tracking you since you won that scholarship.
Then he manages to get an invitation to the Order. He then gets into a fight with another student, which almost gets him expelled, except he gets bailed out. Then, for no real reason, Randall decides that Jack is the perfect fit for the Knights. People just want him in their company for no real reason. Then we have the ethics classes. The ethics professor develops a hyperfixation on Jack after Jack acts like a pick-me girl in front of him.
I'd ease you into the class. Hey, notebook. How you feel?
A little guilty.
Why?
I feel like I'm benefiting from it.
You feel like his death created an opportunity for you. Honesty is actually a cornerstone of ethics. Imagine how well you're gonna do if you actually pay attention. Notebook. Don't leave me hanging. I know you know the answer.
Utilitarianism.
And that is
The theory that the best action to take is the one that provides the most good for the most people.
Jack just throws around a couple of cute buzzwords and the professor bends over for him. We also have another classroom scene where the students are discussing Orpheus and Eurydice.
Yeah, Orpheus was a fool.
Counter?
It's romantic. If that's not true love, then true love doesn't exist.
No, he wasn't in love.
Yes. Go with that.
We felt obligated. And what did Eurydice do to earn?
Because as always, everyone is wrong and our main protagonist is so unbelievably smart that he aces not only ethics but also literature.
At a certain point, you have to live your own life.
And then everyone clapped. Then we have Alyssa. Their first meeting occurs during the orientation that Alyssa is giving to the newly accepted students. Jack, being the main character, just feels the need to show off in front of everyone.
Would you like to guide this tour?
Sure.
Alyssa, being the main character's love interest, quite visibly falls for his act, and is impressed for some reason. Is there anything that this character cannot do? This extends to other characters as well. In comparison to Jack, people around him are varying amounts of stupid depending on what exactly the plot demands. There is a situation where Jack is locked up by the other knights in the relics basement. Those relics are said to have been stashed there for a long time, yet it is only when Jack is locked up there that Jack discovers that these artifacts can be beneficial to the knights.
Have you ever read any of this stuff?
Of course not.
It's too bad. Might learn something. Do you know why you eat your victims' hearts?
Dude, how many times do I have to tell you? Tradition.
You do it to stop the path of the magic.
You have to keep in mind that Jack just joined the university, while these three have been there for way longer. And it is only now that these three idiots realize that there is something that they could do with all these resources they had all along, all because our protagonist came in there and pointed out to these idiots after spending 3 seconds in the same vicinity as those resources. Jack also sometimes somehow runs circles around the members of the Order, coming up with solutions to problems seemingly out of thin air. In comparison, everyone else around him have been in these circles for a far, far longer time, yet their expertise and experience constantly gets shunned and overshadowed by this new guy who just got there. It is just so deliciously ironic that Jack is the exact character that the Magicians is deconstructing. And even still, if the directions Quentin and Jack go in are different, there are still situations within their journeys that are similar. Besides the people that surround them and their love interests, they also share a bit of their their beginnings. What strikes me the most is just how similar the roles of Vera and Jane Chatwin are, at least at first. Both select Jack and Quentin to get into the university. Then both Jack and Quentin get into trouble by fighting another student. Then both of them are on the brink of expulsion. And both of them are given a second chance by Vera or Jane. This might just be a trope that I am not aware of though. There are also some scenes that are eerily similar. There's one scene in particular where Quentin and Jack are in the exact same situation but only in different places. Remember the orientation that Alyssa was giving with Jack in attendance?
Providing the vegetables for the school's cafeteria.
Chatwin moved in next door. Not exactly.
Look at that. We have a question.
Question from the back.
Would you like to guide this tour?
Sure.
Stay close, sir. I'm not sure I can do this tour without you.
But I suppose this scene can be a cliché in and of itself. Yet even some of the plot between the shows are similar too. The third season of The Magicians ends on a cliffhanger. The characters' identities get changed. The Order's first season also has the exact same cliffhanger. Again, these situations are also brought about under the same pretenses, but the plot similarities not even end there. Again, both of these cliffhangers are then followed by a season which have a few episodes of the characters finding each other and figuring out how to remove the identity change. Yet there is also another similarity that Season 2 of The Order shares with Season 4 of The Magicians. Season 2 of The Order introduces a group called Praxis, people who seek to share magic knowledge with the masses and steal the magic from The Order. Season 4 of The Magicians shows the Hedge Witches fight The Order to free magic from the control of the library. It is already unfortunate that both organizations are called The Order. These examples may still not be enough to build a compelling enough of a case. Yet we are still not finished. There's one last piece of The Order that seems to be cognizant of The Magicians. That is, the tone. Its approach towards magic itself. There is a conversation that Jack has with Vera after he uses magic.
You've been practicing unsanctioned magic. Don't let it happen again, Jack. While we introduce you to this amazing world, we'd be insane to think you're not going to be tempted.
Which sounds quite similar to...
Are you guys trying to take over the world, or...?
If you want to take over the world, we don't teach that, but give it a go.
In The Magicians, when they tell you that magic is rough, you believe it. But when The Order tells you that, you cannot help but laugh. Because The Order seemingly once more copies the homework of The Magicians, but they mimic it only by voicing the relevant buzzwords, yet they do not put in the actual work. The magic system on display here, while based on sacrifice, doesn't even really serve the grander themes of the show. It doesn't serve anything. It's just a stupid plot device most of the time that lacks any substance or internal cohesion. It doesn't feel as gritty as they would like you to believe. It just feels so incredibly childish and immature. On top of all of this, they also pretend to be all grown up by using all of these buzzwords.
Would you kids like a drink? Hard drugs? An orgy?
Again, they try to pretend to be all edgy and grown up, just like The Magicians. But then we also have immature and quite honestly stupid jokes such as these.
A bleach of assholes.
A Gregory of assholes.
The assholeos.
A prolapse of assholes.
They also name drop random, obscure real-world figures along their magic lore, just like The Magicians. Listen to this and tell me that it isn't something you would hear in The Magicians.
We do an elemental transference like we did with Keith Richards.
Joan of Arc, the Salem witch trials, Helen Duncan.
Perhaps this type of humor is not confined to just The Magicians. It is quite possible and also most likely the case that other shows have done something similar before. This notion may as well go for any example that was just listed. The Magicians is not some bastion of originality. If anything, it prides itself on taking from other works. That is the thing that The Order fundamentally misunderstands. Within the genre of fantasy, The Magicians occupies a very interesting place. While it very openly draws upon other works, it is in conversation with them. It is a response to trends within the fantasy genre. It is a rather natural progression, an evolution. It is this vision that makes The Magician so cohesive as a whole. It knows what it wants to say and how it wants to say it. The tone, the approach to magic in The Magicians is the way it is because it is serving a purpose. The same cannot be said about The Order. It feels as though it doesn't really exist to add to the fantasy genre, but only to pad out the Netflix catalog. You can simply feel that there is no higher unifying principle behind the choices made in the creation of the show. Not to mention the fact in just how many ways it manages to overlap with The Magicians. These instances I've mentioned in isolation would be fine. None of them individually are completely unique to The Magicians. If you want to apply this logic to everything, then it is simply yet another fantasy show. But it is these elements all existing in conjunction to one another, and in those particular ways that makes it hard not to see The Order as a way lesser version of The Magicians. It is simply odd that it has so many quirks that The Magicians has. Even if it has these quirks, it executes them horribly. I personally don't see any redeeming elements to recommend the show show to anyone. At best, it is an intentional parody of The Magicians, which I doubt it tried to be. At worst, it is a mockery and a shallow attempt to recreate the unique flavor of magic that The Magicians has. So please, do not compare it to The Magicians, because The Magicians it is not. Do not tarnish the good name of The Magicians by trying to establish a connection between them. Just call it what it is: a complete disaster of a show.